Welcome to everybody. We'll try to start just a couple of minutes, 3 minutes after the set time, and we don't have much time because we have time only until 3 p.m. So my name is Massimo Tomasoli, and on behalf of IDLO, the International Development Law Organization, and International IDEA, I'm very glad to meeting you together with the permanent representative of Mongolia to the UN, Ambassador Sukbod Suki, who will provide some introductory remarks to this event. This event is a side event focusing on democratic accountability and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We entitled it Making the People Count, and we'll have time to address the elements of relevance of the democratic accountability to the 2030 Agenda from different angles, especially, I would say, from different regional perspectives. So we have a panel composed of my colleague Elena Bureman, a Senior Program Manager for Democracy and Development at International IDEA, and Judith Arenas Licea, who is Director of External Relations and Deputy Permanent Observer for IDLO to the UN. And to my left, there are two distinguished discussants who will provide their views on the presentations of the panelists. The first one is Dr. Lisa Grace Bersales, who is National Statistician and Civil Registrar General of the Philippines. And in an international dimension, she is also the co-chair of the Interagency and Expert Group on Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you for making your time available for this event. And to my immediate left is Mr. Anselmo Lee, who is Secretary General of Asia Democracy Network, and also in many other capacities an advocate and an expert, and also an academic based in Asia. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Ambassador Sukbod Suki for his introductory remarks. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon, dear panelists. And first of all, let me thank for attending today's this important event for all of us, because as you know that last year we have our leaders have adopted SDG. It's mean the development vision for all of us up to the 2030. Today I'm presenting as the chair of the International IDEA, which is we are chairing this year, because Mongolia is very much trying to be the model of democracy. I always honoring to say that, when I had the meeting with the DSG, Deputy Secretary General, and he was very proud mentioning that Mongolia is the model of democracy in Asia. So we're trying to be the model of democracy in the world. And that's why we are decided 2 years ago to chair the International IDEA. And because this is the very important organ which is promoting the democracy in the world. To implement the SDG 2030, it's the main ways is through accountability. That's mean every. It's okay. No, it's thank you. Because to implement the SDG 2030, everybody has to be in accountable manner. It's mean every organ, every single person to be in care of the vision, the goals of the SDGs. And let's change. Okay. But everybody, I think, listening, yeah, because my voice is very loud. Because I grown up in countryside, and I always love to sing song in my mountain area. So that's why my voice is so loud. And let me, to share some ideas and some progress which we made in my country last 25 years since we made our transitions from the very, very closed country to the very, very open country in 1990s. Because we peacefully moved from one system to another system. So now we are almost 26 years in democracy. In all different areas, we're doing our what we can do that, and to promote the human rights, promote the democracy, etc. And when we adopted our MDG, because globally there was the 8 MDG goals, but we initiated MDG 9 goal in my country. That was the democracy and fostering governance into the all levels. So it seems for us to promote the democracy is the one example. And I would love to share that experience, how we implemented that MDG 9. And recently in February this year, we adopted our SDG, we calling that Sustainable Development Vision by 2030. And we have also 8 very concentrated goals and targets how to implement SDG, which we adopted last year. And I would like to point out the one very important goal is that for us it's 8th goal in our vision is that accountability and the governance for the goals. And the government of Mongolia will, of course, implement activities aimed at improving continuously the leadership of civil service organs at all levels and develop transparent, accountable, and proficient governance at the national, local levels based on the public participation and public-private partnerships. In order to improve the public partnerships, we're trying to, in 2012, we created special system and center which is receiving all voices from the public, and it's being sent directly to the government. And that's why in 2012 we had the new government, and new government's program for action was established directly on the basis of voices from the public, because they collected all voices and created what main objectives, what main criteria, and what the goals they want from the public to improve their lives. And government created a special program for that, and last 4 years that was the very, very successful. And all districts in the capital city especially, they also created special centers for providing public services directly to the publics. People don't need to go to every single place to get some permissions. They just go to the one place and get everything from that place. So it seemed how public participation could be encouraged through the creating the different centers. And also the concerning the democratic accountability, I want to point out one very successful experience which we have faced just end of the last month. We had our parliament election on 28th of June, and it was the third time we have experienced electronic voting system, collected the votes from the all public, and we had almost 1,300 the election branches which being collected the votings, and election was held from 7 to 10 a.m. after 10 a.m. all election was collected, and within 1 hour we have received final result of the parliament's election. It seems for us how we successfully to improve, to create democratic accountability. There is no any single disputes at all during the parliament election. Everybody followed law, and every party also followed law. It's mean they are taking themselves the accountability for making democracy in the parliament election. And also, just for your information, I would like gratefully to inform that currently the Asia-Europe meeting summit is taking place in my country, in Ulaanbaatar, from the 15 to 16. So now, tomorrow, it's almost ending the summit. And in the summit, 11 heads of state and 23 heads of the government and 16 of the foreign ministers are participating in my country. So we are very proud to say that whole world looking for us, and they are looking for us what consequences, what the the decisions would be from that summit, because summit currently concentrating on the terrorism and concentrating on especially on the implementation of the SDG for all of us. So, and lastly, let me thank again for co-organizing International IDEA, and also thanking for all panelists, which we hope that today we will have exchange very important views on the different countries' experiences. So thank you very much for coming again, and I wish the successful today's side event.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I'm aware that you have other engagements, so you may have to leave us fairly soon. But thank you for your words and your encouragement. We have, as you have noticed, we have a webcast which is going on. So this meeting is streamed live. That is why you should also speak to the phone, and very close to the phone, because of the need for our audience to listen. So we'll give the floor now to Helena Bureman, who is the head of our program on democracy and development, and she in particular led over the last months the work on democratic accountability in service delivery, which is a very important angle from which to look at the linkages between democratic accountability and the 2030 agenda. So, Elena, you have the floor, and I think you should use this one.
I didn't grow up singing in the mountains, so I think I need a microphone. Thank you very much, Massimo. It's a pleasure to be here, and sorry for turning my back to half of the audience, but I'm definitely addressing you too. I very much like the title of this side event, Making the People Count, because it can be interpreted in so many ways. That people count, and that people should count themselves. I will talk briefly about some definitions about what is democratic accountability. I will also talk about what difference it can make, and I will also talk about why people should be involved in the monitoring of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And if technology is with us, I will also show a very brief animated video clip, sort of summarizing my point, but in a more entertaining way. And by all means, also pick up, we do have 3 policy briefs, one on lessons from Africa, one on lessons from the ASEAN member states, and one from South Asia. It's available out there, so please pick those. So first of all, on definitions, what is democratic accountability that we talk about? In brief, you can say that this refers to the very many ways in which people, political parties, parliaments, media, civil society, and others provide feedback to, reward or sanction officials in charge of setting and enacting public policy. You can also say that democratic accountability is a crucial enabler of the Sustainable Development Goals and can provide a necessary monitoring framework for their meaningful implementation. And what do I mean by that? Well, inclusive and accountable institutions contributes to all goals. They're not just focused on or important for SDG 16. And since you're all here, I think you probably know that inclusive and accountable institutions feature in Goals 16, but also in Target 16.6. But in the outcome document, actually accountability towards citizens is mentioned in several paragraphs, and the role of parliaments as well. Those will be the articles 45, 47, and 73. So those you will remember tomorrow when you think about this side event. So this is just to make the point that the importance of accountable institution goes across the agenda. So how can then democratic accountability in implementation and monitoring make a difference? Well, let me first say that this, what I will say, will be more, say, from an ideal point of view. We all know that reality out there, as we've heard from some of the interventions across the street in the high-level political forum, that in too many contexts, there might not be freedom after speech, or freedom after association, or freedom after assembly. Another key aspect, of course, reality is that only 1 in 4 of children under 5 are actually registered. And if you're not even registered, you barely exist. So how can you then vote and claim your rights? So then, moving on to how democratic accountability can make a difference. I already said that this concept can serve as an enabler and also as a framework. It can do so at several levels. Let me first just mention the normative level. Since we've produced these region-specific policy briefs, I'd like to mention, for instance, if you have any African sisters and brothers in the room, where there's a quite advanced system for monitoring and reviewing already, even before the adoption of the SDGs, such as the African peer review mechanism, and also the Agenda 2063, which was developed or adopted 3 years ago. In the Agenda 2063, there is a first 10-year implementation plan, which actually establishes accountability and transparency as one of the guiding principles of this agenda. So it will be very interesting to see how that will be married with the Sustainable Development Goal commitments towards accountability. In South Asia, you could mention the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, its Charter of Democracy that notes the necessity for good governance, equitable and participatory processes for sustainable development. So then to be a bit more specific, democratic accountability, again, in the ideal sense, would be people-centered in that it provides for participation in free and fair elections, representative parliaments, media that could provide information that's necessary for people to participate, and also an arena for debate and a watchdog function. And last but not least, of course, the people-centered aspect of democratic accountability would also provide for direct participation. I'm just came back from the high-level political forum with several representatives of youth groups, women's groups, and groups for people living with disabilities kept saying nothing about us without us. And I think that captures the people-centered sense of it quite well. A second aspect of how democratic accountability can make a difference relates to that it can protect minorities and disadvantaged groups. Looking at Lisa now, of course, that presupposes that there is disaggregated data that would show the special situation of such groups. And even also for migrants and indigenous people that tend not to be maybe seen and be made visible. A third aspect is that it can build openness and transparency, because of course without access to information, it's very difficult for people to participate. And on that note, it would be, I think, pertinent to mention a Pan-African initiative called the Strategy for Harmonization of Statistics in Africa, which is a survey-based initiative where a number of countries collect data on governance, peace, and security. And Cape Verde was the first country to publish this data. so that citizens could access it and use it for whatever purposes they had. Democratic accountability also includes answerability, which is the government's duty to justify and explain its decisions. And one example that we bring up in one of the policy briefs is an example from Indonesia, an online initiative that's called Lapor, which means in I think the local language, report. So you can report if you have complaints about services, and hopefully those complaints are acted upon. Yet another aspect of democratic accountability is the responsiveness level, which is about whether public officials listen to people and their representatives. And an example of where this happened in a way that actually led to development outcomes is an example taken from UNIFEM working in Morocco, where an analysis was made of how agricultural extension services were allocated. And in that analysis, it turned out that only 9% of the beneficiaries were women, in spite of women being 39% of the farmers, or say, engaged in rural labor. A final aspect of democratic accountability is that it can promote enforceability, which is sort of the sanctions and rewards part of it. And according to research that we have done, or like as a research overview, it turns out that almost all countries with low scores on service delivery have either very limited or no provisions for effective sanctions, nor any credible incentives for politicians to be responsive. So moving on to sort of why people should be involved in this, like why people making the people count, or making the people count themselves and provide data. Well, in order for the SDG monitoring to be accountable and inclusive, it's really essential that the follow-up and review process includes people's own assessment of the availability, accessibility, and quality of the services. Such as, for instance, and I'll be very interested to hear Lisa's views on this, such as through experience-based surveys to complement administrative data. The follow-up and review process of the Sustainable Development Goals should really be as people-centered as possible. Also for another reason, because that could mirror people's understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of you might have responded to the online survey, My World. I'm looking at Chris from UNDP, where actually the fourth most important aspect that people noted was honest and responsive government. And how can you have a responsive government unless people's views are actually, and people's views and experiences are actually taken into account? Of course, this would require more support to statistical capacity, whether through national statistics offices or complementary mechanisms to enhance the coverage, quality, frequency of data collection and analysis. And if all this would work, of course, then people would be made more visible and they would be listened to. And if there's still time, I think maybe I'm running over time, if we could showcase the very brief video clip just to re-emphasize the point. I don't know who's the master of the... Oh, here's the master, Kieran. Thank you. While you're setting up, I'll just give you some peace of mind. I can just mention that International IDEA is actually working with some think tanks in the Philippines in assessing whether the government or the quality of accountability with regards to government provided relief services after the typhoon Haiyan and Yolanda, and also with the mayor in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. But that's really early days. We're more like talking about how we could work together on democratic accountability and service delivery.
You expect to have access to clean drinking water. But what if you turn on the faucet and only a dirty trickle comes out? Do you know who's responsible and who you can turn to for a solution? What if you submit feedback but don't get a response? If there's democratic accountability, anyone, regardless of age, gender, status, and background, can safely raise complaints at a community council meeting, stage a demonstration, turn to media, and even vote for other politicians in the next election if they fail to respond to feedback. Public services range from water to healthcare to public libraries. Democratic accountability is essential for empowering citizens and their representatives to voice concerns, demand explanations, and impose sanctions or rewards for the performance of government officials and service providers. Improved democratic accountability amplifies the influence of service users over decisions on public services. It also increases openness and transparency in the decision-making processes and provision of public services. In the end, improved democratic accountability in service delivery results in better delivery and higher quality services, and thus sustainable and inclusive development. You can have an important role in assessing and improving democratic accountability in your community. To contact us or learn more, visit the International IDEA website.
Okay, thank you very much, Elena. Thank you also for this short video. And I think I will now give the floor to Judith. As I said, Deputy Permanent Observer for the International Development Law Organization to the UN. Judith?
Thank you very much, Massimo. Thank you very much, everyone who is in the room and also joining us online. And thank you, Helena, for actually setting out a lot of the principles that I hope I will reinforce from the perspective of the law. I think we all know that we have a very big challenge ahead of us, implementing a transformative agenda that will actually place inclusivity, equity, and justice at the center of a global pursuit for sustainable development that will leave no one behind, and this will demand accountability. The International Development Law Organization, IDLO, as the only intergovernmental organization with an exclusive mandate to further the rule of law, has already been actively working on these issues. And I'll shape my remarks probably with a focus of the D in our name, the development, because we work on how development and the law interact and how the law actually supports development. And it's with this perspective that I'm actually going to shape my remarks today. I want to very much thank Helena for setting out the principles of democratic accountability and then allow me to do my own from the perspective of the rule of law, which is also an enabler of development and also applies across all the current SDGs. Non-discrimination and equity, participation and accountability are fundamental principles of right-based approaches to sustainable development. At the heart of the rule of law lies the notion of equal protection, that all persons are equal in the eyes of the law. Effective rule of law frameworks ensure that those who are being left behind, such as the poor and marginalized, are actually able to enjoy rights and are given space to participate in planning processes. By doing so, rule of law frameworks also promote peace, stability, and social harmony. Well-formulated rule of law frameworks promote equality and fair treatment by ensuring equal opportunity and non-discriminatory access to services and resources that are critical to human development. Likewise, effective rule of law frameworks promote accountability by ensuring that individual actors and institutions execute agreed upon processes and actions that lead to development gains. Accountability implies that actors are identifiable and accessible, that there are mechanisms to provide redress when agreements, understandings, or rights are breached, and that officials are actually held responsible for breaching commitments, engaging in corruption, or violating rights. We're actually also dealing with a universal agenda, and it's important that we not forget this, that a properly formulated approach to the rule of law and sustainable development needs to take into account the diversity of challenges for countries along the development spectrum. On the basis of our experience, allow me to make some observations that I believe are actually important aspects for the considerations that we're having here today. And I'll focus a little bit more on how the rule of law can actually work for sustainable development and to promote accountability. So the first point I want to make is about the need for us to have an end-user focus. Initiatives need to focus on building people's trust in institutions. It means that we need to measure the success of reforms and policy measures according to the extent to which they actually respond to people's needs and demands for justice, or indeed for any other public service. That it's particularly important, this is particularly important in post-conflict societies, where there's most often a trust deficit between the state and the citizen. The second point I want to make is actually about the importance of local ownership and international standards. The best results we know actually come when reforms and policies are tailored to meet local needs based on locally defined parameters, but are at the same time anchored within the framework of international standards and values. The third point I want to make is about the importance of engagement with informal as well as formal legal systems. 80% of the world access justice through informal legal systems. We can't afford to forget this, and we need to focus not only on the formal system but also on informal systems and on the relationship between the two if we want to ensure that the state does not abdicate its responsibilities to women, the poor and marginalized, who are the most common users of informal justice systems, exactly those that we must make sure that we don't leave behind. And the fourth, let me focus on empowering solutions. We must be mindful that legal reforms and public policy decisions alone do not actually produce justice or change. Combating discrimination and fighting injustice requires tackling the underlying power dynamics that deprive people from equal protection of the law. Legal and non-legal empowerment strategies are critical in helping people access justice, claim their rights, and demand accountability. So as we all rightly focus on implementation, what are some of the key questions that we need to be thinking of? Performance. Do institutions actually provide efficient services? Transparency and accountability. Are institutions actually operating transparently and with integrity? And are they accountable to rules and standards of conduct? Capacity. Do institutions have the human and material resources necessary to perform their functions and the administrative and management capacity to deploy these resources effectively? And very importantly, impact. Whether justice institutions or indeed any other institutions are accessible and responsive to the needs of the people, especially those who are disenfranchised and marginalized, such as women, indigenous people, minorities, victims, children, youth, and the elderly. For example, let's look at the issue of judicial reform. Most judicial systems tend to track the volume of cases that pass through the system, the speed of decision making, and the kinds of decisions that courts take. But most justice systems actually do not collect information about who uses the justice system and the impact of the court's decisions on them. If courts are actually to be accessible and trusted as well as efficient, if courts are to become a venue for justice for all people, the poor, disenfranchised, discriminated against, underprivileged and marginalized, and not just for the elite, then the indicators of justice must measure issues other than speed, volume and quality of judicial decision making. And allow me here to actually take a pause and acknowledge the excellent work that the Interagency Expert Group has been making on what I don't envy you is a very challenging task of actually measuring how we make progress on the 2030 agenda. And I know that some of these issues are actually new on this agenda and have been particularly challenging. I'm sure that many of you have actually heard the saying that says, the poor need the law, the rich can take care of themselves. The experiences of poor people, women, and other marginalized groups is often a test of the effectiveness and accountability of institutions, including the justice system. In Afghanistan, we run a project to develop prosecution units in the Attorney General's offices for gender-based violence. And we find that where the program actually works for women, it actually works for everyone else too. Indicators of justice need to be disaggregated with a clear pro-gender, pro-poor focus, and as Helena mentioned, it's that wealth of information that will allow us to see whether we're actually making progress. Traditional indicators of access to justice focus often on legal and physical access to courts, for instance on the independence of the judiciary and legal aid. But in practice, our work on the ground actually shows that access can depend on a range of other issues, such as information about laws and the processes, arrangements for witness protection, or in the case of gender-based violence, shelter and employment opportunities for women victims of violence. Research has also shown that the absence of bias and corruption are powerful signs that access to justice is working and institutions functioning. Corruption can be a matter of ethics, but it's also a matter of economics. When you have low salaries of judicial officials or poorly structured case management systems, corruption tends to be on the rise. Allow me to say a few words about civil society. Involving the government is essential, but it's not possible to get a true picture of how effective institutions are and whether they're actually being held to account without involving civil society actors, NGOs, the community groups, and when we talk about the rule of law, legal professional associations. In summary, we have one challenge. Development is undermined when people are unable to access information, express their views, and participate freely in decisions that affect their lives and livelihoods. And the challenge for us is to make sure that we overturn this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith, for your presentation. We have now two discussants whom we have invited to provide their own views and react to the presentation and to the material. Many of the things that you heard actually were specifically addressed to some actual areas of work. And I would start precisely with the area of work on data collection, data interpretation, use of data, engagement with different actors, and how are they related also to the accountability mechanisms established at the country level. Do we have also any value in referring to obligations that exist at the regional level, as we saw with the policy briefs produced on democratic accountability and service delivery? Do we have already examples which we can build on, exchange experience, and perhaps share those experiences also in a cross-regional and inter-regional perspective? So I will start with the first discussant, Lisa Versales, who also attended yesterday another event which is related to this topic, the launch of a web-based platform on SDG 16 indicators. It's called the SDG 16 Data Initiative. So, Lisa, yesterday already you started to provide some feedback, but I'm very interested in listening to your views now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Massimo. And I thank Helena and Judith for bringing forward all the issues that need to be discussed as regards democratic accountability in the Agenda 2030. I would like to actually share and answer Massimo's question, but I would also want to talk about Philippines because I've been involved in some of the research in the justice reform system when I was not yet with the Philippine Statistics Authority, and I was with the university. So so data, I think everybody really agrees that data plays a very important role in Agenda 2030, because we have to know if we are indeed accomplishing what we need to accomplish. And specifically also to answer the questions of Judith earlier on performance, transparency, capacity of the different institutions to deliver what it is supposed to what they are supposed to deliver regarding Agenda 2030. So along with discussions on data really are issues of measurement. Do we measure quantitative only, or should we also look at the qualitative aspect? And I would like to say that the work of the interagency expert group on SDGs indicators focuses on global indicators. In my opinion, this is really the minimum number of indicators. When you go down to the country level, you would really have to provide more, especially if you want to address the issue of disaggregation. And so, indeed, we need to give faces to the quantitative indicators. And I was in one side event, I think it was our side event on July 13, where I think it was Alan Miller who said that they will have a parallel report that shall talk about the qualitative aspect of monitoring the Agenda 2030 to complement the quantitative report that will come out of the indicators. And I totally agree that with the numbers, there should be faces. So making people count. And this could really be case studies maybe, and discussing how and why the indicators are this. So the global indicators are really quantitative, but there are some which are not really quantitative. I would encourage, of course, additional complementary indicators from this group. And the platform of the on SDG 16 of data initiatives is for me a very good example of first reports specific to a certain goal. Of course, we said that we will continue to engage the countries from which the data will come to make sure that we have comparability, we establish standards, and we have data quality. If I may share in the Philippines, actually there are already institutions that establish accountability. We have in the Philippines the Civil Service Commission, and this is really the commission, the body that tells civil servants how we should act. It provides ethics, it determines performance, and it actually has a feedback center where citizens can give feedback, and the commission will give to concerned officials the feedback from citizens. The Chief Statistician of the Philippines is also Civil Register General. So we actually provide frontline services. My office provides the birth certificates, death certificates, marriage certificates, annulment papers, etc. And we actually, for a country of about 101 million people, we actually release civil registry documents daily nationwide of about 60,000 documents nationwide every day on average. And we are able to do this because we have a private partner that provides us additional people, additional machines for us to be able to issue the birth certificates and security paper. Now, so I receive a lot of feedback from the Civil Service Commission on citizens complaining that senior citizens were not given proper attention. They had to wait a long time. And so as soon as I get those feedback, I give to the concerned official. But also in the office of our president, there's also another office there that receives citizens' feedback. And the Civil Service Commission requires government officials to give feedback within 15 days of receipt of any complaint. On the area of budgeting, the former administration, we have a new administration now that started June 30, but the former administration already had reforms in budget process. We have what we call the bottom-up budget process, where there is people's participation from the community level on what services they want and budgets that need to be provided by government. And we also have performance-informed budgeting system now, where the government agencies, when we ask for budget, we have to first submit our performance. Otherwise, we might not get the budget that we ask for. And this all needs people's participation. In my experience on the survey, I think there was a question earlier on my thoughts regarding experience-based surveys. Actually, that has already been acceptable in the statistics community, that we do surveys which are perception-based or experience-based. And this is in recognition of the fact that some of the concepts that we actually are measuring in the statistics offices are very complex. Poverty, for example. Poverty is not just income poverty. It has a lot of dimensions. And one dimension is how a person perceives himself or herself to be as regards poor, being poor. So that is already acceptable, the conduct of such questions in surveys of perception. But perception of the general public is different from the comments of one who actually experiences for example, justice system. So actually, the judiciary had this justice reform project, and they did a surveys of users of courts. So the surveys asked lawyers, citizens, those involved, the police, the clerks of court, the justices, even we actually also interviewed even the Supreme Court justices on their perception of how citizens perceive themselves. And so it was a very important report that we gave to the judiciary. And unfortunately, though, it was just a one-time survey. So the issue of sustainability comes to fore really when we do Agenda 2030, because you cannot just do one survey and then stop. There should really be sustainability as well, so that we can actually monitor the performance of civil servants. I think I will stop there so that Anselmo can also give some comments.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And your closing on the sustainability of all these efforts is very important, because it looks into the perspective of the 15 years ahead for the implementation of the 2030 agenda. But in general, the capacity of institutions is also linked to the sustainability of the processes that are set in motion. And another element of interest is your focus on the Philippines. We heard already from Mongolia, from the permanent representative, another example of engaging with the public in order to get feedback, not only on how they experience, but also about their vision for the future, and helping therefore the executive also in defining plans for the future, which is another very important aspect. And in fact, in your capacity, you are at a very important nexus between assessing what happens, but also providing data for informed planning ahead. Thank you also for specifically responding to Judith's and Elena's presentations. Now we move on to Anselmo Lee's views. There was a mention of the importance of engaging with civil society from Judith in her presentation. Citizens' views and their voice is something that also Elena addressed in her presentation. Civil society is a partner. Today at the high-level political forum we addressed the partnerships development. We heard the voices of civil society or major group representatives throughout the last week, and of course also in the negotiations. So maybe Anselmo, you can provide us your views as an engaged representative of civil society organizations, and perhaps also from the perspective of a region, Asia, that has gained a lot of experience in this area. So Anselmo, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I feel very at home in this meeting, because this is a main issue I've been working on. And also I'm with the Mongolian ambassador. 2 weeks ago, I was in Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, to attend the Asia-Europe People's Forum prior to ASEM. So we discussed also democracy a lot, and also witnessed once again the democracy in Mongolia, which is very peaceful and order. And also with Lisa Grace, because this year, 2016, is the 30th anniversary of People Power Philippines. So we are discussing now in Asia new democratic wave, 30 years stock taking. So the Philippines and Mongolia is the two champions of the democracy in Asia. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm from Korea. I'm working for Asia Democracy Network, which is only 3 years old, very young. It's a network of civil society organizations working on democracy issues. Personally, also, I've been involved in the post-2015 process the last 3-4 years, and also the Community of Democracy, which is another intergovernmental network working on democracy. So I'm participating as a civil society. From that angle, I'd like to share some comment on this presentation and the general. As you know, unlike previous UN the conferences meetings, the civil society response to SDG was rather different from previous. Usually, civil society very critical and cynical sometimes the UN meetings, talking only. And usually we say, oh, we are very disappointed and no concrete action plan, blah, blah, blah. But this time, the last year, I was here the September, many civil society first sentence was welcome, very rare, welcome the adoption of 2030 agenda. Why, Because as you, many of you said, because SDG is very different from MDG, So in several sense, for the reason that civil society welcome SDG, but now civil society getting disillusioned, because high expectation last year is going down and down, because goal level rhetoric okay, principle okay, when it was the target and indicators, we are losing the essence of the spirit of 2030 agenda. That's a general feeling, So, and more civil society today, this week, very frustrated and concerned about this high-level political forum and also future of SDG agenda. So, number one is, nevertheless, SDG for civil society point of view, number one is goal 5 and 10, that's inequality. Goal 10 is the most, I think because of goal 10 and the goal 6, and because of these two, many CSO welcomed SDG, 16 and 10. And also the emphasis on the role of parliament and also local government, which is very important in the grassroots democracy. And lastly, data revolution, the citizens like the word revolution, data revolution, So we are very excited all these rhetorics, So, and also very interestingly, the SDG bring us together, overcoming silo, fragmentation. That's also very important. In Korea, I was first time invited to Statistical Commission. I never, because they invited me to talk about SDG because they have technical expertise, but no political understanding about SDG. So they invite civil society, person like me, to explain about SDG. So again, the SDG bring us together, connect each other for common goal. So in that sense, SDG is very useful. But question is how, From civil society point of view, there are a couple of challenges we are facing today. Number one is, we have been discussing a lot democratic accountability, also human rights accountability. But in reality, in many countries, according to civil society reports, especially the Civicus and many other, Freedom House, civic space has been shrinking, The many countries, And also, human rights defenders are in detained and also killed. The last week, my organization issued a statement about the killing of Mr. Kem Lay, the Cambodian. He's a political activist. He was shot dead, the daylight in the street, So this is our reality, So sometimes from democracy advocates, human rights defenders, this SDG discourse, sometimes we feel uncomfortable, Even the slogan, no one leaves behind, But behind what, Sometimes we said, from human rights point of view, no one leaves behind the bar, Then many people are in the prison, And also no one lives behind the curtain. Decisions are made behind the curtain, So unless we address those challenges, I think the SDG is somewhere, up there. It never come down to the ground, That in that sense, the, democratic accountability is a missing link, and also is enabling and the fundamental, to make SDG meaningful for people. And then another point is, it's very interesting to observe this meeting because this is a IDRO and then the idea, which is not really the main intergovernmental body in this whole discourse. That's why we are having meeting side event. But I believe it should be the main event. UN headquarters next time. Very interestingly, the idea your office in Rome, your office in Stockholm, right?
Yes.
But all this discourse development in New York, human rights in Geneva, environment in Nairobi, right? And also finance in Washington, right? So how to bring our discourse into New York, into Washington, into Nairobi, and then Geneva, I think this is our common task. Because without democracy, I believe that all this blah, blah, blah never come true, So I think we need to really work together. This small but very significant organization like IDRO and then IDEA and also Community of Democracy and also together with the civil society, I think we need to really get together, you know. So in that sense, I'm really, really happy about this initiative. I think we need to continue. And so we have two interesting opportunities this year. July next year, there will be a ministerial conference of Community of Democracies, which is another intergovernmental organization on democracy. And last year and this year, the presidency is United States. You know? So this ministerial conference will be July 25 to 27 in Washington, D.C. Hopefully, we will have a new president in the United States, open to democracy, all these ideas. So that we can have this ministerial conference in July. This can be a really good opportunity, bringing political leaders to make sure that they are committed to democracy and also democratic accountability in this SDG process. You know. And also July this year, September, there is a G20 summit in China, you know. And then this SDG again in the agenda, SDG in the agenda in G20 summit. So how to bring democratic accountability into SDG in G20 summit can be also interesting opportunity and challenge. You know. Lastly, from CSO point of view, this SDG and also UPR, you know, UPR, Universal Periodic Review of Human Rights Council, these are the two universal agenda, very, very important, because especially in Asia, some governments are still very reluctant to talk about human rights and democracy. You know. For instance, in Asia context, if you raise a human rights democracy, you are easily labeled as, or you are working for Western agenda, you know, foreign agency. You know. That's why it's important for the democratic government in Asia or other regions get together, like Mongolia, South Korea, Philippines, to get together to speak out about democracy and human rights in Asia, not in New York, you know, not in Geneva, you know, so that truly the democracy human rights is a universal agenda, you know, not in the rhetoric. I think this is our common challenge, you know. So I want to propose once again with the ambassador from Mongolia, Philippines, we work together in Asia to promote democracy among Asians, so that we can share our experience with the others. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anselmo. We will have to get more into the comment you made about being in the mainstream, because we are actually in the mainstream. Even if we are in this room, we did interact, and there are many partners from the UN in this room, and in a way there is not only the UN of the member states, there are different UNs as it has been addressed in the past, and we are fully part of that. But you're right that we have to focus on turning these commitments, deeds into action. That is a key message I think that we should all listen to, and we are actually trying to talk about implementation. So I wanted to provide also an opportunity to intervene from the floor. Anybody who would like to make a comment or a point, we have the microphone, so maybe just raise your hands, and then we'll have this conversation. So we have first of all Chris from UNDP. I think you need, is this microphone okay?
Thank you, Massimo. Chris Murgatroyd from UNDP, and many thanks to the Ambassador, to the panelists and to the discussants for some fascinating insights, and I think a really useful way of bringing a number of ideas to life. And I wanted to focus on a couple of things. One was the images, which are always so compelling. It took a little bit of time to get the technology to work. I'm sure there's a metaphor in there for the SDGs somewhere, but it was worth it, because I think that image of the person standing by the tap is one that many people will take away from this event, and I want to come back to that. But the second was a comment that Lisa made about the IAEGs and the official statistics, and perhaps to start with that, because as Lisa acknowledged, the 231 indicators are still only a partial snapshot of everything that people will be interested in. And again, Lisa made the point very eloquently that countries will want to take up that responsibility from the agenda to develop their own national indicators. There's a requirement to work on national indicator frameworks. And in a way, that seems as if it's polarizing. We feel quite strongly, I think, in the UN system that there are two competing priorities. One is to support the building of statistical capacity. There's an obligation in target 17.18 to build that capacity. So we know we've got to focus on those 231 indicators. That's an absolute top priority. But the development of national indicators that are going to get at the issues that individual countries identify as their own priorities is also a top priority. So how do you manage those competing priorities almost? And for me, it comes back to that image of the person by the tap. And for those of you that, unlike some of us that have parts of Goal 16 tattooed around our body, indicator 16.6.2 is where perhaps all of these things come together. In other words, that experience-based survey process that Lisa mentioned of getting at people's last experience of public services. Okay, there's a number of methodological issues that we need to overcome. You know, what does last mean? What does experience mean? And who are you asking? If the phrase is making the people count, how do you design that so that we're getting at the issues that really matter for people? But for me, that brings everything together at once. Because if you could design that in a way where people feel comfortable explaining their last experience, that will go straight in to the global level monitoring. That will, year on year, across the road, come out in the annual SDG report. And so for me, that's kind of bringing the slightly abstract, a little bit random process that as Anselmo says, we get sucked into in New York, actually down to the ground and into real people's lives. So if we can maybe focus on some of that experience in all of the things that we do in the next few months and years, that would be really helpful. But thank you again to all the panelists.
I think the next is Harry Blair. Please
Well, I already have the mic, so very convenient. Yeah, my name's Harry Blair. I'm recently retired political scientist from Yale University. And no, it was really helpful to get 4 different perspectives on this, and very informative. I have a couple of questions to ask for Helena. You mentioned several times sanctions. Could you say a bit more about that? Sanctions implies that not only are public officials going to be held into account or held accountable in some way or other, but there's something that's going to happen. Heads will roll, people will get fired, transferred, things are going to change. What kind of sanctions are involved here? And then for Lisa, on this idea of experience-based surveys, I may be telling you what you already know, but an excellent example of this is in India, the Public Affairs Center in Bangalore, which has done a number of surveys of citizens' opinions about public service delivery, the public transport system, the police, public health. And not only were the surveys done, but it was publicized. So it appeared in the newspapers. It became public knowledge about which agencies were doing well and not so well. And then another one was done 2 years later, and another one was maybe 3 years after that. And there was visible improvement. And they've done a number of other the surveys in other places as well. And that gets me to my last point. The media. It's not enough for all this information to be gathered and even people held accountable, but people have to know about it. Now, media used to be, what were we talking about, print media, newspapers, maybe radio, television. Well, now the whole arena of social media is something I'm wondering what you folks are thinking about. How are we going to incorporate that into all these things that we're doing? Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. There is another question from the back, and also there. So, do we have just one microphone, or can we use? Okay. And first, introduce yourself.
Thank you. I think its microphone is not really working in this room, so I have to speak up. My name is Mikiko Sawanishi, working for the UN Democracy Fund. And I just have to say thank you very much for the panelists. We are very pleased to work with you, all of you, as an important partner. At the same time, we work with a local civil society organization directly. So it's a civil society, it's citizens, it's most important client for us. And then also you mentioned the provision of service, the monitoring the provision of services. It's really important. And then I have been seeing like citizen-led initiatives, very effective, very local, and very low tech at using a mobile phone, but very low tech to monitor the progress of project and services. And then link to the website, link to the media, and then link to the government. And then finally, government is taking also actions. So what I really want to, for example, India, I just came back from India. It's really successful initiatives happening in central India, Andhra Pradesh and others. So I just want to say it's this kind of a citizen-led initiative is very effective, and then what I see also policy brief and by idea is also covering government-led initiatives. So I just wondering, it's maybe this can be somehow linked or coordinated, because like for example, India one, it's scaled up by government. So that's government using their methodology because it's really locally done and then meeting the needs of people. So I just really want not necessarily question, but feedback. Thank you.
My name is Ali Jalani, and I'm coming from Pakistan. I think the gentleman from Korea was right on spot with the idea of shrinking spaces for civil society and democratic inquiry in developing countries. This is the reality that we live there, I believe, democratic inquiry is central to the idea of data accuracy leading to SDG success. So my question is, IDEA and the rest of the global alliances, what level of support could you offer to the local organizations working at the grassroots level to counter this problem? Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm Eva Jespersen from the Human Development Report Office, and I wanted to pick up on the point about communication that has come up. I think we also need to think more carefully about how governments and at all levels actually communicate to citizens what are their rights and how they access them. And I think also we have to recognize that the public at large is very diverse, and therefore we also need to start using a wider range of tools. And I think you, Mr. Tomasoli, you yourself picked up on the use of social media, but where we can say we now tend to charge into it, but many people don't know it or don't access it. So I think, again, just as the engagement with citizenship needs to be much more diverse, because I think what I have also been lacking here a little is that even among citizens, they also have different perspectives. I mean, it is a little as it's just about grievances and then you can take them to court. But people come with very different perspectives on how rights should be interpreted and how they gain access, and there can be conflict situations. So what are the opportunities to actually solve or mediate conflicts between different groups of citizens when they make claims on the state? So I think we need to also recall that in all of this, and the more democratic and accountable we come, it also becomes more political. And there should be space for it, but not so that it isn't just a technical fix, but actually a discourse and a negotiated process. I don't think this microphone makes a difference. It's natural.
Hello, I'm Abraham Joseph. I was earlier working as special advisor to the foreign minister of East Timor, which is called as Timor-Leste, and was also working with the United Nations for close to 28 years, currently with the University of Oklahoma. Just I would like to mention, having worked both at the UN and also working with the government, especially in East Timor, and also having earlier worked with African countries. The main issue is the low statistical capacity. And for example, in East Timor, we were struggling to get assistance for building the human capacity to build up its statistics. It was extremely difficult. And I'm just wondering to myself, where is the assistance going to come from for building the statistical capacity, especially in the low-income countries? Or I would say like Africa, least developed, landlocked, small island states. This is one I want to mention. The second is having implemented already the MDG. I'm sure that the panelists must have observed gaps in the implementation. So I just want to know get observation from you for effectively implementing the SDGs. What needs to be taken into account? Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions from the floor, I would get back to the panelists. And maybe I would go then back to the panelists in the inverted order. So I will start with Anselmo, then Lisa. Lisa first. Lisa first, okay.
Thank you very much. I think I would like to answer Chris' question earlier, which is, how do we establish coherence between the global monitoring, for which indicators have been identified by the expert group on SDGs monitoring, with national level indicators, which is to be determined by the countries within their own context. That is actually something that I have been thinking about as we were discussing the global indicators, while I'm also wearing the hat of the country statistician. And this is how I made it easier for me. Countries are committed to provide the data for global monitoring. So statistical systems really have to look at the 230 indicators, check what data are available within the country, and continue to provide the data through existing mechanisms for data flow. What are these? Each national statistical system actually provides data to the various international development partners for them to report internationally in the sectoral accomplishment in the world of what needs to be done, even without the SDGs. So WHO has been collecting data from the countries on health statistics, FAO on agriculture. So we shall continue to do that. But in the discussions of SDGs in the national context, national statistical systems should also be able to provide the types of data for the indicators at the country level and even the subnational level. So that's really tough for the national statistical systems. My personal view is, let's do what we can this year and next year, but try to build on what we are doing. So we should not be stagnating. So if we're able to produce like 40 indicators for the national, for the global monitoring and 60 for the national, then we should have more in the next year. So capacity is actually the issue. Capacity of the people that will be generating the statistics and packaging them for good communication. And this is really where a lot of partnerships and support for each other would come in. In the Philippines, we really rely a lot on academia to provide us with constant supply of staff, because when our staff grow and learn a lot, they would want to go to greener pastures. So they usually go to international agencies, they go to the central banks, which have better compensation. And so we have to continue on producing and having capacity building for more people. So in my opinion, it takes a long time. So I'm looking at Abraham. It takes a long time to have that good sustainable structure within the country to do the capacity building. That would require really good academic institutions. But with open universities, distance learning mode, I believe there's a way to try to fill the gap for capacity building. Yes, yes. Yes, so I've been also in a part of the discussions of training institutes. In Asia Pacific, for example, we have the UN SIAP, Statistical Institute for Asia Pacific, and I believe that they are building networks from various countries, existing training institutes to help different countries provide capacity building. I would also like to mention that strong civil societies should exist in the countries to really help this provision of a good data ecosystem in the country. And I talk of data ecosystem, when I mean data ecosystem, this means that data from different sources of from various sources, the traditional as well as the new ones, which would include citizen-generated data, etc. In the Philippines, we are again very fortunate that our civil society is very strong and very active. They actually are the ones who really seek us out, and it's good that the atmosphere has been positive. But actualizing this discussions take time, and that is why I really like what SDG 16 network did, that you have this portal of data initiatives. It's not that ideal yet, but at least there is already some tangible, actual platform for data. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of questions related to the role of civil society. Following what Lisa said, I also echo once again the importance of the role of civil society in this monitoring. As you know, yesterday there was a side event, and then so there are a lot of civil society group and also research group, and the idea get together to promote citizen participation in the monitoring. And but obviously, like you said, that many governments are also being challenged to the capacity, statistical capacity, but at the same time, civil society. In this sense, I think it's important to also to support both the government and civil society in terms of the monitoring. But as a person from UN Democracy Fund said, because majority of people, so-called the poor countries, they don't use so-called high tech, So we have to find a way how to more, to really promote the participatory process with a low tech, How people can participate in the monitoring process using the easy to use material, I think that we have to, but my feeling is here in the SDG agenda, we stress a lot STI, science, technology, innovation. But my feeling is it's a little bit very technology driven, what very technical, but in fact SDG is a political issue, that's why the title is a political forum, so I think we need to pay attention to the political aspect of all technology and so on and so on, in that sense. Once again, I want to stress the importance of civil society using this low tech or more participatory manner. And also, I like the one publication of idea which focus on local democracy, local government. I think that's very, very important, because the now question is the nationally, statistically very, very difficult, but at least local government, if there is a strong political will, we can make a big change, if we find a good mayor or governor. So in that sense, I want to really propose more bottom-up process, bottom-up approach on SDG implementation from different angles. But one very interesting initiative, another initiative in Geneva is my own government, Korean government, they put a resolution on local government and human rights. This is a new initiative, And also they are developing the guiding principle on which means how local government participate the human rights mechanism, UPR treaty body, so that usually when you say human rights, basically national, it's an obligation because ratified by national government, but local government should be able to participate all this process, both human rights and also democratic SDG process. I think we need to really maximize this potentiality of the local government in this process. Then we can find a more innovative way of participating and also monitoring SDG. So this is one. And then lastly, the importance of the independent, as you know, the many cities like Civicus, they have a data shift, citizen generated, a lot of initiative. But question is there any mechanism in UN where this independent monitoring can be properly reported and they be part of official? I think it's very, very important. Data ecosystem, this is very important, so that we have a so-called official, the monitoring mechanism based on official data, at the same time independent and different types of monitoring, so that we can see the whole picture of the reality, and then we can have a better plan for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Anselmo. Now, Judith.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, everyone, for your comments. Let me start maybe by addressing first the issue of capacity development, because I think the issue of capacity development and support for capacity development is something that we actually heard throughout the entire negotiations, even before the SDGs were adopted, where member states and indeed regional, national, local organizations, civil society actors were actually raising that we're faced with a very ambitious agenda. We had 8 MDGs, we now have 17 SDGs, which are actually much more complex, and we know that this is an area that needs to be invested. I mean, we are faced with an ideological paradigm shift, even if you look just at the substance of what the SDGs capture. So I think the importance of supporting capacity development at all levels and across all actors is actually essential. We've talked a little bit about statistical officers or statistical actors, if we want to call it that way, and I know that that's something that UNDP is very actively trying to figure out how we can do it. But we're also talking about implementation, about awareness, and about understanding. So I don't have a clear answer. All I can say is that certainly when we look at our own programming, we definitely believe in the bottom-up approach that Anselmo has mentioned, and believe in the importance of actually working with local civil society and other partners, because we recognize the successful technical assistance and implementation of solutions cannot succeed without everyone being involved, and that there has to be an active awareness about building that capacity. I think another interesting point that came up in the discussion was the issue of coordination and coherence. And I think it probably is nowhere as challenging as in Goal 16. Why? Because simply it's the one goal that is, unlike many of the other goals, not kind of owned by a single UN agency. But here you have actors that are acting within the UN system, and you have other actors like ourselves and our colleagues from IPU that are also missing here. I mean, it does happen across, energy. Of course, you've got the International Renewable Energy Agency that also works outside the UN system. But it does mean that, as we've discussed when we always talk about technical assistance, we also have to do policy coordination because all the resources are stretched, and we need to be able to be sharing not just what we're doing, coordinating on what we're doing, but also sharing the intelligence and the lessons learned and making sure that all of this is being fed into a virtuous cycle of policy making and program design and implementation. So I think maybe I should just reassure Anselmo that we take this very seriously, but also there is a degree in overlap because our governance, as in the member states that make us up, are also UN member states. So there is a double layer of oversight in that way and coherence. But it does mean that I think informally we need to improve on that, and I think that coordination actually again has to go back and include all actors. It's going to include civil society. It's going to include, and I would actually hazard to say it has to go beyond the very formulaic definition we've had of the major groups, and actually go more broadly into everyone that is involved in this process. I was very glad to hear that the issue of mediation, because I think the whole notion of mediation is, we know that the development agenda is a very expensive agenda, and we keep hearing that achieving all the SDGs is a ginormous task, and that we're not sure how governments are going to be able to afford it. And we've had conversations about how every single actor needs to be brought together to the table. And to me, this is where mediation becomes actually critical, because it is actually not only is it a conducive way for many type of disputes to try and resolve them through that channel, but it's also way less expensive, and it's more accessible, particularly when you're looking at the groups that we're talking about in the agenda. But things such as alternative dispute resolution and mediation are actually often not very well known. So I think that brings me to the final point, which was the point of communication. And as a communicator and the person in charge of outreach and communication for my own organization, I'm very glad to hear that this topic has been brought up. We're actually in the process of undertaking a wide consultation to shape our next strategic plan. And one of the key things that people keep highlighting to us, which I'm quite glad to hear this, but I probably, as somebody who is almost a little bit too embedded in these processes, forget, is that people don't actually know what the SDGs are. They don't know what the 2030 development agenda is, or more importantly, they don't know why they should care about it or what it will deliver to their day-to-day lives. And I think that's both a challenge for us, but also a responsibility that we have to tackle it. And we'll certainly be doing more work about communicating more broadly with different stakeholders about how the law can actually help further development. It is challenging because we know that information consumption patterns have changed. So it's something I love discussing, so I'm always happy to talk about it. But the day when you used to read the newspaper over breakfast before you went out and you'd kind of know the day's news has kind of ended. But there is no one model fits all. Our permanent representative here still reads the newspaper and will talk very strongly about what he reads in the newspaper. But on the other hand, some of my colleagues will be constantly throughout the day saying, have you heard about what's happening on Twitter, and have you heard about this? Yet we know that, for instance, some of the most successful ways that we've had, for instance, of sharing a good lessons. I mentioned the Afghanistan violence against women work. The way we've been able to make sure that women know about this is because we've been on radio programs about it. The way we've actually been able to raise awareness about HIV and legal empowerment has actually been through putting information in doctors' offices. So I think, we know the basic principles are out there about communications for development, and we just have to take a little bit of a step back and learn about it. But I think thank you for reminding us, because it's an important issue that we often tend to overlook.
Thank you. I'm going to be very brief in the sake of time management. Just to pick up on a few comments on communication. I very much agree with you, although I'm maybe one of the old-fashioned people still reading the newspaper over breakfast, and then reading online news for the rest of the day until I fall asleep. Just to add on to that, but by the way, Twitter apparently seems to be almost like going out. It's not growing anymore, the Twitter account. So if you ask teenagers today, you would rather communicate through Instagram, Snapchat, or Kik. And I don't think we should forget radio broadcast, because not everybody in the world have access to social media or internet or the electricity that they come with. So turning to the specific, there was one specific question to me, but let me just first say thank you to Chris for praising the film. I'm glad you liked it. I hope other people will like it too, and maybe that could be one communication mean. And it's available on our YouTube channel, so if people would like to use it for, whatever purposes you might have, please do so. So Harry's question about sanctions. Well, sanctions could come at several levels. You would have administrative sanctions. Let's say, like maybe you get a salary cut if you don't perform, or you get maybe not a salary cut, but you don't get a salary increase, rather. There could be legal sanctions, such as maybe you get dismissed if you really do something bad, if you're completely corrupt. At the political level, it could be a matter of withdrawal of votes, that the government is actually voted out of office for not delivering at all or for being entirely corrupt. There could be social sanctions, that you get a bad reputation or you lose credibility. But I think when you speak about sanctions, I think you also need to add the rewards aspect, because the research that we did, rather that we summarized, also pointed out that it's not only lack of sanction, but also the lack of rewards, of incentives that seem to correlate with low service delivery. And with rewards, again, on that matrix of legal, political, etc., that could be that you get promoted for actually doing more than you were expected. Or if you're a government, you can get re-elected. If you're a private company that delivering services like, say, water and sanitation, maybe you get a renewal of your contract. And again, your credibility could increase, or your reputation would grow. But I think a third level that we should also mention is the learning aspect, because when you talk about sanctions and accountability, that comes from an understanding of accountability as being somewhat adversarial, like somebody made a mistake and should suffer from it. It might not always lead to actually like improvements across the board. It might lead to fear and risk aversion. So there is a whole debate about something that's called more cooperative accountability, which would rather emphasize the need to, so setting and clarifying mutual expectations, let's say between governments and a trade union or whoever is the stakeholder on the other side, and agreeing on like some standards to gauge performance. And then you do that, and then you agree on, okay, what did we learn? What worked? What didn't work? And it would appear that that's maybe more effective in the long run. But these are like, no, I mean, you're a political scientist, so you would know that. Huge debates. Actually, we are just about to publish a discussion paper about sanctions, rewards, and learning. So if somebody's interested, please make yourself known, and I can send you the link, because it's a matter of days now that it will be published. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena. There are another few minutes before we close this meeting, and I think that there were a couple of questions that were not addressed, so I'll try to look at how I can reply to them. First, the question on support to local level organizations in a situation in which there is a shrinking space for civil society that came from our colleague from Pakistan. Well, I can talk about this from the point of view of international idea. We do engage with different actors when we work at the country level. We for example, work with parliaments, we work with public institutions, with the academia, and also with civil society organizations. I must say that the very possibility of an international organization like IDEA of being present in a country is probably already an indicator that the space for civil society in that country is not shrinking as it may in other situations. So the more sensitive, the more difficult cases in a way escape from the reach of an organization that can work only on the basis of an official invitation by a public institution. But we do work also with other partners that are supporting those civil society organizations. I think that Anselmo made reference before to the Community of Democracies, which is in that sense best equipped, more equipped for providing support in a different way, including by providing access to networks or international networks and tools that may be used in order to protect the space that is actually shrinking. I want just to recall to all of us that last year's International Day of Democracy on the 15th of September was in fact on this topic, and it was celebrated at the UN with the support and the initiative of the Interagency Working Group on Democracy, which is a body established by the UN Executive Committee on Peace and Security, and on that occasion, especially with the leadership of the UN Democracy Fund that supported the participation of speakers in that occasion. Things have not necessarily improved, but the high visibility of the international community to this topic, I think, has probably helped many activists on the ground. I wanted also to refer to what Mikiko said about working with civil society directly. I think that the concept of civil society is an ambiguous one. We do not have all the same understanding of what civil society is, and therefore I must say that sometimes the reluctance on the side of certain public institutions or the state to engage with civil society is also linked to this difficulty in defining what civil society is. So there is here, I would turn it, let's say, in a constructive way. When we talk about accountability, we don't talk only about the accountability of states. Democratic accountability is also demanding on all actors in order to improve their own accountability. And that is something that applies to my own organization, to IDLO, to the UN system, and it applies also to civil society. So strive for increasing accountability in all those respects that have been addressed by Elena, by Judith, by Lisa, and also by Anselmo. Strive in that direction is also very important for civil society actors. That being said, I think that we should be aware also of the difficulties that still exist in engaging civil society in many situations. And I wanted to stress a couple of points in this respect. This interface or space with civil society by public institutions cannot be engineered in just one way. There are many different ways of engaging. There are many experiences, and I think that exchanging those experiences, as I think it has been shown also in the policy briefs introduced by Elena in her presentation, is perhaps a good way of increasing our learning, mutual learning from different regions, countries, etc. I think that there is also another call for other actors in terms of accountability. Public service delivery is not only the responsibility of public institutions. There are many public services that are increasingly provided by private actors. The reference to social media that was made before, data generated by citizens are actually channeled by services that are not public in their ownership. They are actually private sector supplied services. Accountability by these actors, by private actors, is not good. It has to improve. It is improving. There are calls, there are initiatives, and we welcome those initiatives for opening up private operators, private actors in the supply of public services, but still we are not there. And especially if we look 15 years from now, it will have to improve dramatically in order to ensure accountability to citizens. And that is a call, I think, that needs to be done because specifically because there are already initiatives by the private sector in order to open up, and those should be welcomed, and we should build on that, bearing in mind, that market forces sometimes run against that type of accountability. No? Think of the usage of data, issues of privacy, and still it is very, very critical for the success of this endeavor globally. Let me just conclude by recalling a couple of key things that I take out of this meeting. One is that, yes, there is a power in images, as Chris said, and I think communication may make use of that. We are linked a lot to delivering statements, making rational arguments, but the power of an image is so great that we should be more aware of that and making more use of that in the work that we do in our daily ordinary work as well. Second thing that I take away is that there are many priorities, a very complex framework, and sometimes these priorities are competing, and we have to live with that. But still, I think out of these competing priorities, we can identify the synergies, the leverage that each actor can provide in order to achieve, the key priorities that we have identified. Mongolia made already an attempt, as the permanent representative said, in focusing on clusters across the board. But I'm thinking also of how reporting to the high-level political forum shouldn't be just fragmented goal by goal. I know that this is a conversation that member states are still having. There is a plan for the next 4 years on reporting on themes or sustainable development goals individually. I do hope that this sense of a vision advancing on a very complex agenda will be kept despite the need for reporting on individual aspects. Then Lisa's point about a global, national, very impressive, and also I would say the subnational, as you said, the disaggregation of information or data, I think again a challenging problem for all of us, but I think we should again try to do as much as possible in order to contextualize and take into account also subnational determinants. And finally, again going back to the communication, I was not really very impressed by the way the goals, first of all, they've been called the global goals, have been digested in order to communicate better. Let's take the SDG 16, and now if you look at how it is branded, it is peace, justice, and strong institutions, especially this one last expression, strong institutions. It's not really what I feel it should be when you talk about accountable, effective institutions. We are talking about something different. There are countries in which institutions are very strong and they're not accountable. So let's communicate, but let's not lose sight of the nuances, the important meanings that we have attached to negotiations that produced eventually, I think, what is an acceptable and remarkable result. Having said so, I'm sure that nobody would understand SDG 16 if I hadn't any ways of providing a qualification for it. So I understand that there is a need for communication, but not at the expenses of the meanings and the values that underlie them. Okay, so thank you very much for having participated in this event. I'm sure that there were other comments, other views. We can communicate also through our accounts, so please provide feedback, and we are at your disposal for making available more information. Thank you very much to all the participants, the panelists, and to Mongolia for participating in this. Thank you.